Hello people, welcome to this video about how to write a successful pop song. Well, I suppose in a way that title's a bit of a misnomer really, maybe just an attention grabber, because what I really want to address are comments made by a chap called Ralph Murphy on a video whose link I will put in the description down there. Ralph Murphy is part of an organisation called ASCAP, A-S-C-A-P, which is it's the big American recording industry sort of organisation, as it were. And he's a very nice man, or at least he sounds a very nice man from his classes. And he does talk a lot of sense. You can't really argue with what he says because it's the truth. But what he's not telling you is the whole truth, I feel. Okay. Now, I haven't made as much money as he has. And, my songs, amount to like 52 listeners on SoundCloud or something like that, and so perhaps maybe I'm not the most qualified person to talk about songwriting from practical experience, except as a consumer in brackets of the music, someone who cares passionately about the music and has lived it and lived the effects of good pop music. I'll talk about that in a minute, really. And unfortunately, for Ralph Murphy, what he does is he limits the target audience of, what he sort of calls good pop music, and belittles the audience of others, and in doing that, what he's done is he's divorced pop music from its essence and its and really its very origins. Let me just give you a quick rundown, quick resume of basically an hour and 49 minutes class. You thought my videos were long and boring. What he does basically is talk about his target demographic. Okay, he calls it his 7 a.m. audience. Okay, basically it's the woman in the family that wants the news, the traffic, and the weather for the day, that has to listen to basically zillions of advertisements and DJs saying stupid things on the radio in order to get that. And as well as that, there might also be the odd singer in there. And what he suggests is that this target woman doesn't really understand or hasn't really got the time, shall we say, for for pop music, because she's got a million and one things to do in the morning, and really and truthfully she can't be doing with it. So already the songwriter is almost at loggerheads with the audience, and unless you invite the audience in to your song and identify with her in particular, then that song is not going to sell. Okay, I suggest here, he is not particularly wrong. Okay, there are loads and loads and loads of songs which do address the needs of women. Okay, he had another audience which he called the 10 o'clock at night audience, and sorry, you can hear a lot of extraneous traffic noise from outside and some music in the car, sorry. He has a 10 p.m. audience. His 10 p.m. audience has relaxed, got, glass of wine, nice friends, sitting round, nice ambience, in the lounge, whatever, good conversation, and there's a song, okay? And the song sort of comes last, okay? He put into that category singers like Joni Mitchell, who he called the raging, venting, whining audience. The raging, venting, whining singers, okay? And almost sort of belittled their craft. If you want to do that, fine, but I can't help you, sort of thing. Which I kind of take exception to, because there, as I say, there are 101 songs, or 101 million even songs, which do address this female personality. It can't be overlooked, okay? But what it's doing is addressing, that within my personality, I will have, and every man's personality as well, there are sensitive female traits. Okay, John Lennon had a complete volte-face, or sort of about turn when he met Yoko Ono, because he suddenly realised, the psyche of the woman. Okay, he understood it from a male perspective, never really understood it from a female perspective. But in the 70s, in the early 70s, when he met Yoko Ono, she encouraged him to really look at the female perspective, and then wrote some of his most successful solo songs. Similarly, with people like Bjorn from ABBA, who really did understand the female perspective. Okay, but there is an underlying sort of trait in pop music which cannot be overlooked. And I'm afraid that the examples that this guy played of what he called successful pop songs that sort of went to that particular formula were just dirgy, drivelly sort of ballads. And I don't want to sound like a bigot, but that is essentially what they were. Okay, you can go and listen. Okay, because it was sold out pop music. It was music that was being created, and literally being created, being manufactured for white, heterosexual, middle class, Disney-fied America. Okay, and it's a million miles away from the roots of true pop music, okay? And if he's taking a class on this for an hour and 49 minutes, and he doesn't cover the essential elements of pop music, then he's really done a very bad job, I feel. Now I'm not sort of talking in a sense of, arguing with him, because yes, what he says is right, but it's far more than that, okay? His problem is that when you get to the underlying traits, and I will come on to them in a moment or two, but when you get to the underlying traits, it means that somehow or other, for him, there is less money to be made, because he doesn't want to make his money like that. Okay? And I made a series of comments on the video itself, which you'll also be able to read, unless somebody comes along and deletes them. I wasn't particularly rude or anything. In fact, I wasn't rude at all, but I do feel that they've ignored the essential parts of pop music, the thing that actually makes you want to get up in the morning and face the day. is actually missing from that. You know, he's addressing a very jaded, you know, stereotypical female here, and not and totally missing the point, and thereby essentially castrating the people in his class, and you know. So anyway, what I will do is here, if you'll allow me, is to expand on the comments that I made. Okay, he gave a very comprehensive view of specific forms of pop music. Okay, if you whittle pop songs down and just sort of look at the verse and chorus structure, shall we say, there are about sort of 5 or 6 that are in common use. Okay, you know, and yeah, listen to him for you know essentially how that works. But essentially, what we're talking about here are things like verse, chorus, middle 8, chorus repeat, perhaps an instrumental, chorus repeat, and then out. Okay, or you know, verse, lift, chorus, verse, lift, chorus, middle 8, instrumental, chorus, out. Okay, and you know, and typical variants on that. And he did, to be fair, say that once you know those basic forms, then you can vary them. Part of perhaps, you know, my problem in my songwriting is perhaps that I don't really pay enough attention to those forms. Okay, and I deliberately do things like not rhyming. My lyrics have structure to them, but they don't rhyme. Okay, they don't always necessarily follow the right amount of bars in each sort of section, as it were, because that's not how I write. That's not what's coming out of here and going onto the paper, you know. And at the end of the day, it is what comes out of here that goes onto the paper. So yeah, full marks for that. Yeah, fabulous. You know, there are specific forms that are typical to various genres of pop music, and you know, fabulous. Yeah, if you can write to those forms, then you're you know, you're catering for the genre. Okay, and kind of like doing it a little bit of justice. Okay, what he doesn't give any attention to at all, okay, and this is still not the underlying trait of pop music, what he doesn't give any consideration at all to, at least in this hour and 49 minutes, is that if you write a piece of music and you write some lyrics, there has to be an underlying tension between what the music is saying and what the lyrics are saying. Okay, and yes, he talks about the fact, and you know, again, I think, you know, he does the human brain a bit of a disservice here, but you know, basically saying that, you know, we can't multitask. So if your song is telling a story, then you don't want too much of a melody going on there, because you want the brain to think of the lyrics. Okay, if you're if you know, if you're just sort of, you know, you've got a catchy hook, basically a catchy lyrical hook, okay, then the brain can actually cope with more of a melody. Okay, and yeah, again, not entirely wrong, but not right either. Not really right, okay? Because what the relationship, the intrinsic relationship between the music and the lyrics are tension, okay? It's why a good film is a good film. A good film is a good film because it's not all wonderful. Okay, there is tension being built up and being built up, even in the nice bits of a film. You know, you're sort of, you know, maybe sort of 10-15 minutes into a film, and you know it starts out with, you know, this wonderful, you know, family existence or whatever going on, and then suddenly there's a crisis, and all the time, even in the nice bits, you're thinking, what on earth is this crisis going to be? Okay, because of devices that are being used to build up to this crisis. Okay, and a song is exactly the same. Okay, this is why, even in songs like It's Been a Hard Day's Night and I've Been Working Like a Dog, but when I get home to you, I find the things that you do will make me feel all right. Okay, and what you have here is essentially a song that is an up melody, but well, an up lyrical sentiment, shall we say, but a melody that an a chord sequence which is being based on a blues scale, which has all sorts of clashing notes in it that create dissonance and tension for us. Okay, because even in the lyric there is this tension. I work jolly hard, people. I'm knackered. You make it all right. Okay, I come home to you and everything is all right. Okay, and the music is playing out all of the tension that is in his life. Okay, the hard day aspect of it. It's the blues. Okay, the blues was invented essentially by Negro slaves, basically, who essentially were, you know, kept in slavery, and they and it was the vehicle for their songs about liberation. Okay, and that is essentially my whole point. Okay, all right. Pop music may appeal to a certain female demographic. It always has done. You've only got to look at the teeny boppy sort of boy bands and things like that, really, to see, really, everyone from, you know, the Bay City Rollers to the Osmonds to the Jacksons, you know, and you know, to you know, perhaps, you know, more modern boy bands like Busted, and you know, they've even split up now. It shows how modern I am, doesn't it? But you know, yes, there is this female demographic, but above and beyond that, there is this expectation of slavery and liberation, being liberated from a particular circumstance. Okay? So number one then, yes, he ignores the tension that is being created in music. Okay? Even in an up song. I gave the example of Dancing Queen. Okay, in my comments, basically, for every up word there is a minor chord in Dancing Queen. I've talked about it before. Okay, her life at that particular moment may well be, you know, a bit exciting, a bit whatever, but the underlying thing is this tension between what she does on a Friday night and the rest of her life, and how actually at the end of the evening she goes home alone, leave and burning, and then you're gone. Okay, it's not necessarily an entirely sort of desirable state to live out Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday and Friday up to Friday afternoon. Okay, so the second point, okay, and the really big point, is actually liberation. Okay, just about every genre of pop music addresses the soul that is enslaved. Okay, it probably even goes deeper than that as well. There's, you know, I suppose, you know, a quite spiritual aspect to it as well. But it's a soul that's enslaved. Okay, I gave the example. You know, if anyone can tell me, you know, and identify within the Pet Shop Boys, okay, who were extremely successful during the 1980s. They've got a new album out now, by the way, called Electric. But you know, and throughout the 90s as well. Okay, who were they? Who was their demographic audience? It wasn't a woman stuck at the sink washing up the breakfast things and trying to get her kids off to school. You know, it was a gay audience. It was a gay audience that were, you know, even in the 1980s, sort of isolated and alone. Okay, and you know, it's very telling that the first single that they had that went to #1 was you know, and they played this down because you know, it was, you know, again, you know, this is, it's going to come to another point really here, but they played it down because Neil Tennant hadn't come out by that time. But their first song, "Sometimes You're Better Off Dead, There's a Gun in Your Hand, It's Pointing at Your Head, You Think You're Mad, Too Unstable, Kicking in Chairs and Knocking Down Tables." Yeah, this is an isolated gay person who, through you know, centuries and centuries, and you know, in modern history, decades and decades of oppression, of church sort of bigotry and everything else, is in an isolated situation where actually they're suicidal. Okay, and again, East End boys, West End girls. Okay, I think that's the sort of kind of pseudonym, as it were. I don't mean the pseudonym. I don't know what, you know, a metaphor for basically, you know, finding a partner. Okay, and you know, it's a dead end town. You know, there's just nothing there, and you know. So, you know, that sets the tone for all of their music, Okay, I gave, you know, the other example, sort of going back to the Beatles, about, you know, how, again, to do with sex, again, sexual liberation, but more than that, an escape from the misery of the war, essentially. You know, the London, you know, even in the late 50s, early 60s, was just in a terrible mess from the war. Okay, I think sweet rationing ended in about 1955. You know, so essentially, you know, even, you know, coming up to 1960 odd, you know, there were deprived people. Okay, there were people, you know, doing their laundry in, you know, basically public sort of you know, bath things that weren't even like washing machines, like a laundrette. You know, they were, you know, they were having to take their washing to, you know, basically a source of hot water, a big communal source of hot water, and, you know, having to, you know, do their washing. You know, yeah, it might not sound like the most terrible hardship in the world, but it wasn't. You know, it wasn't like sort of new modern standards of living, and suddenly, you know, onto the scene, you know, come these energized boys singing "She Loves You," yeah, 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 and suddenly encapsulating a sexually repressed and socially repressed um, society. Okay, and a society that badly needed, you know, lifting out of the doldrums due to the war. Okay, they were dangerous. They were dangerous to the authorities. Okay, and this was, you know, part of John Lennon's underlying tension within the Beatles. Was, you know, I talked about it a little bit in Strawberry Fields, but the fact that, you know, he wanted to be dangerous, he wanted to be a rebel. but he was reined in a little bit by management, perhaps even a bit by Paul McCartney, although they sparked one another. Um, and Paul curbed John's excesses and John curbed Paul's excesses, and so it kind of worked. But liberation, guys. Okay, this guy Ralph Murphy was particularly sort of had a lot to do with a lot of country and western hits, but again, he didn't tell his class that really, perhaps that one of the biggest statements of country and western music was Johnny Cash going into Folsom Prison, performing a concert, releasing the gig. And his concert was entirely devoted to addressing the needs of those inmates, particularly this thing about freedom, okay, and liberation. And you look at the lyrics where he gets the biggest cheers, and even songs like Tammy Wynette singing "Stand by Your Man." Sometimes it's hard to be a woman, giving all your love to just one man, and yeah, okay, identify with the woman, okay, but he said, be very careful with your pronouns, never do yourself down. So if there's a bad situation that you're talking about in your song, then it's always a he or a she, okay? Never do yourself down, okay? So I, in the song, fabulous, okay? You, even greater, and invite you into the song, okay? And again, not wrong. Paul McCartney again will attest to that. But from me to you, okay, please please me like I please you, and all their early songs were based on that, but they moved away from it to an extent. And in Stand By Your Man, Tammy Wynette is portraying herself as this poor downtrodden woman, okay, and yes, it may well identify with women. It probably would also a lot of men would perhaps be able to see the errors in this person's relationship here. But essentially you're saying, poor cow, get out of there. That is the subtext of that song, okay. If it wasn't there, it wouldn't be a song, okay. So there is this tension, and this need for freedom, which is being expressed in some of the best songs ever, really, okay. I'll again, disco and rap and stuff like that would not come about by if it wasn't for black oppression and gay oppression as well, particularly with the disco side of things, and the disco, as it were, was a craze throughout the 70s, okay. Again, it was leapt upon by the greed of the industry, okay. It had its roots castrated, okay, so that by the mid 70s, you even had octogenarians going to disco dancing classes, the way that that they probably went to go to barn dances and line dances and things, perhaps in more recent times. And it sort of was divorced from that concept, but at the nub of it, the actual nub of the thing is liberation. Okay, doesn't matter who you're liberating, whether it's a downtrodden woman trapped in a boring relationship, or a whole community of oppressed people. It's It's liberation. Get out of it, you know. Um, so, you know, this liberation, there's a big element of danger going on as well. Okay, I've mentioned John Lennon, but think about people like Mark Bolan, David Bowie. Okay, David Bowie's, you know, androgynous image there, you know, and you know the guy is an absolute icon. Okay, people like Prince, for example, who, you know, again, by American ASCAP standards, as it were, Prince was not successful. By everyone else's standards, the guy, you know, is an absolute, you know, pinnacle of pop music, okay, except by their standards, because their standards want, you know, 6 singles a year and an album every 6 months or whatever, you know, and they want it, you know, constantly to be delivered to white heterosexual middle class America, you know, and sadly, life ain't like that. Even people like Kanye West. Kanye West, I have down really, you know, as a bit of, you know, one of pop music's casualties. Really, even Whitney Houston. I'll talk about her in a second as well. But you know, Kanye West. I've got one album by Kanye West. I don't play it as much as I should do, but I do love it. I do adore it. And what screams out at you right from second number one is this whole oppression thing. Okay, it's full of these tiny little sort of 15, 20, it's late registration I'm talking about here, but it's, you know, full of these, you know, sort of, you know, little 15, 20-second little skits where he's questioning this idea that because you're black, that you accept some sort of status quo whereby you're kept on the street, you know, what's this? Goddamn book bag. You know, some goddamn fourth grader. You know, you've had a shower. You've had a shower. You're wearing aftershave. You know, you know, and this idea that, you know, if you're down, you can't get up again. Okay, you know, and he is challenging that kind of mentality. Okay, which he presumably, I don't really know too much about it, but he presumably saw that, you know, in the black communities where he lived. And yeah, so you've got this really sort of challenging album. Okay, the guy rightly is, you know, sort of being invited onto a news program to give his comments about, you know, I think it's Hurricane Katrina, the one that hit New Orleans anyway. And he saw those pictures of New Orleans, and he saw how distressed people were, and you know, he gave his opinions. He wasn't responded to, and they cut him off. But his opinion essentially was George Bush does not care about black people. Those were his words. George Bush does not care about black people. Okay, if it's a white family, the media is portraying them as looking for food. If they're a black family doing the same thing, then they are looting. You know, he talked about, you know, how you know, how slow America, you know, the America's relief organisations, you know, were being put into operation because of a war that they didn't want to be in, you know, and poor guy, you know, he was, you know, he was, you know, hugely, severely taken to task for what he said, and you know, he said, you know, I nearly lost everything, you know, and it's very notable that his biggest hit since then, and I don't really know what he's doing now because he seems to have gone off the radar, since those comments really, but his biggest hit since then was I don't remember the title of it, but it was basically about shopping in London and LA, you know, and designer names and that sort of thing. Which, you know, yeah, he'd gone on about his designer names and stuff in his earlier music, but it was always within this, you know, within this challenging context of you know, of lifting people out of their sort of misery, stuff like that, you know. So yeah, in a sense, Kanye West kind of had to sell out after he made those comments because it was just too controversial for the likes of ASCAP and middle class America. Yeah, poor guy. Okay, you know, again, you know, talking about selling out, you got people like Whitney Houston. Okay, I don't particularly like Whitney Houston. I won't slag the poor woman off again though. You know, especially speaking ill of the dead. I don't want to do that. You know, I do think, you know, terrible shame and all that sort of thing. And you know, and I give her credit for, you know, having sold millions of records and stuff like that. And you know, the woman can sing even though she overdoes it. But shut up! Stop it! Stop going on! Stop digging yourself out. But you know, what did we have here? You know, we had this first album that had "Saving All My Love for You" on it. Okay, and on the front of it, she's this slinky, not aggressively sexy, but overtly sexy black woman. Okay, and her music is black music. Okay, yeah, you know, did very well, very nicely, thank you. But you know, the second album, as it were, I Want to Dance with Somebody. You know, you can just see the talons of corporate greed that has come onto that, and you look at the front cover of that, and what is she dressed as? A black version of a white preppy female student. Okay, and you know, it's a cop out, it's a sellout, and she received a lot of criticism again for that. You know, but it was where, you know, I suppose the music machinery, as it were, wanted to take her image in order to get her into even more homes and sell even more and make them even more money. Okay, I'm sure Whitney Houston didn't do badly out of her career, but at the end of the day, you know, the real money is going to the ASCAPs of the world, the industry. Okay, the guy even said in his lecture, you know, I will give you these tips now, but you know, in 10 years' time, I will screw you over. You know, because I will be the one making the money, not you. You know, you might be able to, you know, you'll be able to live out of it, but it'll be me. I'll be the one making the money. What else did I write about here? I'll try not to go on for too much longer, but yeah, danger doesn't sell. Controversy doesn't sell. Is this, you know, is the mantra kind of thing of this, you know, sold out pop music, really. I talked about someone else here. I think I've lost a sheet of paper, bear with me. Yeah, you know, people like Stevie Wonder. You know, Stevie Wonder, I suppose, with, you know, with his sort of artistic freedom and stuff like that, you know, because the guy was obviously talented and sold records and was extremely popular, you know, but he still didn't compromise his essential messages. Okay, everywhere there's a dig, you know, racism. You know, there's a song on Hotter Than July. I can hear the tune now. I can't remember the title of it. It's my age, people. But yeah, you might have the cash, but you don't have the right colour face to rent this apartment. You know, that's the bottom line of it. Okay, you know, even songs like "Happy Birthday to You" and stuff like that were about, You know, people like Martin Luther King, who challenged, you know, racism. Okay, living for the city, talking about poverty. My favourite number of his, you know, Pastime Paradise, which is about, you know, creating religious unity. You know, for all those songs there where he's really sort of, you know, aiming, you know, and talking about liberation, you know, and challenging, you know, authority and stuff like that. Yes, you know, on the back of that, there's an "I just called to say I love you," but you know, it's this compromise, and I suppose, you know, what I'm saying is that you can make money out of, you know, and still, you know, make a living out of pop music without totally throwing the very essence of it, you know, out of the window. Okay, even ABBA did, to an extent. Okay, because they refused point blank to cooperate with the music industry. They talked about, yeah, you know, wouldn't have been as fabulous to have been as big in America as we were in Australia. But what they weren't prepared to do was compromise on their ideals and, you know, what that would have meant for them in, you know, becoming part of this, you know, huge American machinery. You know, probably having to tour over there for 6 months, 12 months or something, which they hated doing anyway. But, you know, and it is pure slavery. Um, you know what's going on there. You know, they won't reunite now, probably because they would have to get caught up in this great big tour thing and whatever to ever make it worthwhile and to make it big enough. You know, for people to recoup the huge amounts of money that that they would have to recoup. You know, plus, you know, they understand enough about pop music to know that, you know, for people in their 60s, yeah, you know, all kudos to people who are 60 and whatever, and you know, and stuff like that. But it's not pop music. It just isn't pop music, you know, and you know they won't do it. Okay, Joni Mitchell, who the guy belittled, you know, essentially, you know, if you're pissed out of your mind, then you'll enjoy a Joni Mitchell song, you know. But you know, that was essentially his take on her. But Joni Mitchell had kicked the American recording industry in the teeth. Okay, her early songs, yes, they might have, you know, there may well be this very strong hippie element and this element of appealing to the female psyche, you know, all the flowers and, you know, bows and flows of angel hair and all this sort of stuff like that, which is all how lovely and really nice and everything. But, you know, her biggest hits were, you know, had a very strong element of criticising Vietnam. Okay, things like, you know, the song Woodstock. Okay, Big Yellow Taxi. I play Big Yellow Taxi to my kids sometimes. There's been a couple of times where I've taught classes of 9 and 10 year olds and used that song as an example of how pop musicians do use, you know, the vehicle of pop music to to challenge authorities, and the kids love it. The kids absolutely love it, and you know, and when they understand the points that she's making in that song, which, you know, are not particularly difficult points to make, but you know, but for 9, 10 year olds, it's, you know, for them it's a revelation, and they suddenly, you know, you just suddenly see the smiles on their faces when they realise, look, this woman, you know, she's not just singing any old crap that she's written on a fag packet. You know, she's singing about me. She's singing about the world that I'm living in, and you know, slammed for it, still being slammed for it. Poor love by Mr. Murphy. You know, up yours, Mr. Murphy, really, for saying that, really, because you know she criticised the music industry. She criticised the fact, you know, and you know, she actually came out and said it. It's absolutely corrupt. those albums of hers, you know, there's the really big classic albums of hers like Blue, um, you know, yeah, you know, she did all right, I suppose, out of them. But when she told her friends, look, I get so and so um, for every record I sell, they said, well, look, hold on, you know, though that's not even, you know, minimal wage, you know, for the lowliest black person, you know. That was the reality of it. It was just the fact that she sold so many of them. The same way with the Beatles, really, in their first record contract. The only reason why they ever got really rich, no one expected them to. These four, you know, louts from Liverpool, whatever, you know. Um, so they were, you know, signing contracts where they got like a quarter of 1 penny to share between them for, you know, for each single sold or something. And um, it was only the sheer volume that was sold that ever made them a living. Okay, and that's the rub, really, because, you know, even you know, Asda, Walmart, and Tesco sort of, you know, would pay you better. Okay, given the work that you do and the hours that you put into it. Okay, and your poor Joni Mitchell having to sort of, you know, having to struggle, you know, on sort of, you know, a few cents per record that you're selling. You know, it's really not good. Okay, when she was, you know, interviewed, she did a series of interviews for some album or whatever that she put out in the 90s, and she said, "Oh, I've got to stop here. You know, this is MTV. I'm being interviewed on here, but this is like being in, you know, Guantanamo. You know, the constant barrage of the same question over and over and over again. Look at Agnetta's interviews that she's done for her latest album. Okay, you can only watch one of those, because by the time that you've watched the second one and the third one and the fourth one, the same questions, the same answers. It's torture. It's absolute torture. Okay, but yeah, you know, a huge icon, challenging it, working within the industry, but on her terms, and, you know, exposing it for what it is. And that is what pop music does. Okay, it identifies with your soul and your struggles. It challenges what's going on there, you know, whilst working with it, you know, not making you, you know, to feel like some sort of, you know, anomaly or alien because of such and such a thing that's happening in your life. It's saying, it is living your life with you, but challenging at the same time. And that, I'm afraid, Mr. Murphy, is what you've totally missed. That's why, you know, unless you address those points, and songwriters address those points in what they write, what they're going to come out with is absolute drivel. And then they'll be called Mark PS1 and have a SoundCloud channel. See you later. Bye.